My parents kicked me out at 19 for dating my girlfriend. She's trash and you're throwing your life away for some lowlife, my mother hissed, as she shoved my belongings into garbage bags. My father stood behind her with his arms crossed, nodding in agreement. Don't come crawling back when this little fling ruins everything you've worked for. But 3 years later, when they discovered her father owns half the tech companies in Silicon Valley, suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing with their desperate apologies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Alexis, and I'm 24 now, but this story takes me back to when I was a sophomore at Riverside University, completely naive about how ugly family dynamics could get when money and status were involved. I thought I knew my parents. Thought they were decent people who'd raised me with good values. Turns out, those values had some pretty selective fine print that I was about to discover the hard way. Looking back, I probably should have seen the warning signs earlier. My parents, Richard and Patricia Thornfield, weren't exactly what you'd call progressive thinkers. Dad worked as a mid-level manager at a pharmaceutical company, and Mom taught elementary school. We lived in Maplewood Heights, one of those suburban neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone's business and keeping up appearances is practically a religion. They'd always been obsessed with image. What the neighbors thought, what looked good on Christmas cards, what would impress their book club friends. But I was young and optimistic, still believing that love conquered all, and that my parents would eventually come around once they got to know the real Zara. God, was I wrong about that. I met Zara Blackstone during my sophomore year at a coffee shop near campus. She was working the evening shift at The Grind, this little indie place that all the students loved because it stayed open until midnight and didn't judge you for camping out with textbooks for hours. I'd noticed her before. Hard not to, really. She had this striking appearance that turned heads wherever she went. Jet black hair with purple streaks, multiple piercings, tattoos snaking up her arms, and this confident energy that made her seem older than her 20 years. What caught my attention wasn't just how she looked, though. It was how she handled the difficult customers with this perfect blend of professionalism and sass. When some entitled fraternity guys would get rude about their orders, she'd shut them down with a smile that could cut glass. When stressed students were having meltdowns over finals, she'd slip them free pastries and words of encouragement. She was tough but kind, and I found myself making excuses to study there just to watch her work. The first time we actually talked, I'd spilled my entire iced latte across my economics textbook because I was too busy staring at her instead of paying attention to what I was doing. Instead of laughing at my clumsiness like I expected, she immediately grabbed a towel and helped me clean up the mess. "Economics, huh?" she said, glancing at my soggy textbook. "Professor Martinez?" "Yeah, how did you know?" "Had him last semester. Guy's brilliant, but his lectures could put an insomniac to sleep. Here's a tip. Sit in the front row and drink coffee beforehand. Trust me." That simple interaction led to coffee dates, which led to long walks around campus, which led to study sessions that turned into deep conversations about everything from philosophy to our dreams for the future. Zara was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She was studying computer science with a minor in business, working 2 jobs to pay her way through school, and somehow still finding time to volunteer at a local animal shelter on weekends. She never talked much about her family, and I didn't push. I figured everyone had their reasons for keeping certain things private. When I mentioned her to my parents during our weekly phone calls, I kept the details vague at first. "I'm seeing someone," I'd say. "She's really smart and hardworking." They seemed pleased enough that I was focusing on school and not getting into trouble. The problems started when I brought her home for the first time during winter break. I should have prepared them better. Should have explained that appearances aren't everything. Should have given them some context about who she really was underneath the alternative look. But I was so crazy about her and so confident that they'd love her once they got to know her, that I didn't think it through. The moment Zara walked through our front door, I watched my parents' faces change. My mother's smile froze in place like she'd been hit with a stun gun. My father's eyes went wide, then narrow, then settled into this disapproving scowl that I'd seen him use on aggressive salespeople and politicians he didn't like. They managed to get through dinner making stilted small talk, but I could feel the tension radiating from them like heat from a furnace. After Zara left that night, all hell broke loose. The interrogation started immediately. Where was she from? What did her parents do? Why did she look like that? Was this some kind of rebellion phase one was going through? I tried to explain that she was brilliant, that she was working her way through school, that she was one of the kindest people I'd ever met. But all they could see were the tattoos and piercings. All they could think about was what their friends would say. "Alexis, honey," my mother said in that condescending tone she used when she thought I was being naive. "You're young and impressionable. Girls like that are looking for someone to take care of them. She's probably just using you." "You don't know her," I shot back. "If you'd actually tried to have a conversation with her, instead of staring at her like she was some kind of exhibit, you'd know she's incredibly independent and smart." That's when my father jumped in with his favorite lecture about how I was throwing away my potential, how I needed to think about my future, how relationships in college were supposed to be fun but not serious. The subtext was clear. Zara wasn't the kind of girl you brought home to meet the parents, and definitely not the kind you built a future with. But I was in love. And when you're 19 and in love, you think you can change people's minds through sheer force of will and righteousness. I had no idea how deep their prejudices ran, or how far they'd be willing to go to break us up. I thought it was just an adjustment period, that they'd come around once they saw how happy she made me. I was about to learn that some people's minds are made up the second they form a first impression, and that my parents' love came with conditions I'd never realized existed. The real nightmare was just beginning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tension in our house became unbearable after that first dinner. What I didn't realize at the time was that my parents had already made up their minds about Zara before she'd even finished introducing herself. They spent the next few weeks conducting what I can only describe as a full investigation into her background, and what they found, or thought they found, only confirmed their worst assumptions. Let me paint you a picture of who my parents really were, because understanding them is crucial to understanding how spectacularly wrong they got everything. Richard Thornfield, my father, was the kind of man who believed that success was measured entirely by conventional markers: salary, job title, neighborhood address, the kind of car in your driveway. He'd worked his way up from entry-level pharmaceutical sales to regional management over 20 years, and he wore that climb like a badge of honor. Every promotion was a victory, not just professionally, but socially. It meant better dinner party invitations, more respect at the country club, and bragging rights with his old college buddies. My mother, Patricia, was no different. She'd been teaching third grade for 15 years, but what really mattered to her was being seen as the perfect suburban wife and mother. She organized charity luncheons, served on the PTA board, and had perfected the art of humble bragging about my achievements to anyone who would listen. "Oh, Alexis is studying business at Riverside University," she'd say at every social gathering, like I was personally responsible for solving world hunger. They'd raised me in this bubble where appearances mattered more than substance, where the right clothes and the right friends and the right activities were essential for a successful life. I'd gone along with it, mostly because I'd never had a reason to question it. I was a good student, I'd never gotten into serious trouble, and I'd always dated boys who fit their narrow definition of appropriate, clean-cut guys from similar families who played sports and planned to go into business or law. Zara was my first real rebellion, though I didn't think of it that way at the time. I genuinely believed that once my parents got past their initial shock and actually got to know her, they'd see what I saw. someone intelligent, driven, and incredibly caring underneath an unconventional exterior. What I didn't know was that my parents had already started their campaign to break us up. It started subtly. During our weekly phone calls, my mother would ask pointed questions about Zara's family background. "Where exactly did you say she was from, honey?" Or, "What do her parents do for work?" When I admitted that Zara was pretty private about her family and that I hadn't met them yet, I could practically hear my mother's alarm bells going off through the phone. "Don't you think that's a red flag, Alexis? Most girls your age are excited to talk about their families. If she's being secretive, there's probably a reason." My father took a different approach. He started sending me articles about gold diggers and college relationships that distract from academic success. He'd call with stories about his coworkers whose sons had, quote, "gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd and ended up dropping out or getting into trouble." The message was clear. Zara was a distraction at best, a threat at worst. But the more they pushed, the more I dug in my heels. Zara wasn't just my girlfriend. She was becoming my best friend. We spent hours talking about everything from quantum physics to our favorite childhood movies. She helped me with my statistics homework, and I helped her practice presentations for her programming classes. She introduced me to bands I'd never heard of, and I got her hooked on terrible reality TV shows. It was the kind of relationship where you completely lose track of time because you're too busy laughing or debating or just enjoying each other's company. The fact that my parents couldn't see any of that they were so fixated on her appearance and their assumptions about her background, made me question everything I thought I knew about them. Were they really the open-minded, loving people I'd grown up believing they were? Or had I just never given them a reason to show their true colors before? Meanwhile, Zara was dealing with her own family complications, though she still wasn't sharing many details. I knew she talked to her father regularly. I'd overhear bits of phone conversations where she'd update him on her classes or complain about difficult professors. But she never mentioned visiting home for holidays, and when I asked about meeting her family, she'd always change the subject or make vague comments about, quote, complicated family dynamics. I assumed her family was probably struggling financially, maybe going through a divorce or dealing with some other crisis that she didn't want to burden me with. The fact that she was working 2 jobs and seemed to stress about every expense supported that theory. She'd always insist on paying for her own meals when we went out, would buy the cheapest textbooks she could find, and wore the same few outfits in rotation. I respected her independence and never pushed for details she wasn't ready to share. What I didn't realize was that Zara's secrecy about her family wasn't about money problems or dysfunction. It was about something else entirely. Something that would have changed my parents' entire attitude toward her if they'd known. But Zara had her own reasons for keeping that information private. Reasons I wouldn't understand until much later. As spring semester wore on, the pressure from my parents intensified. They started making not-so-subtle threats about my tuition payments, wondering aloud whether I was mature enough to make good decisions about my education and my future. They'd invite me to family events and specifically ask me not to bring Zara, claiming it was just family, or that there wouldn't be enough space. The worst part was watching how it affected Zara. She never complained directly, but I could see the hurt in her eyes when I'd have to make excuses for why she couldn't come to Sunday dinners or family gatherings. She'd put on a brave face and tell me she understood, that family dynamics were complicated, but I knew it bothered her more than she let on. "Your parents hate me," she said one night as we were studying in her dorm room. She said it matter-of-factly, without anger or self-pity, like she was just stating an obvious truth. "They don't hate you," I protested, though we both knew I was lying. "They just need time to get to know you." She looked at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through all my attempts to smooth things over. "Alexis, some people make up their minds about you based on how you look or where they think you come from. No amount of time is going to change that." I wanted to argue with her, to insist that my parents were better than that. But deep down I was starting to realize she might be right. And that realization was breaking my heart. because it meant I was going to have to choose between the family who raised me and the girl I was falling in love with. I had no idea that this choice was about to be forced on me in the most dramatic way possible. The breaking point came during Easter weekend of my sophomore year. My parents had been unusually insistent that I come home for the holiday, making a big deal about how it was important for family to be together during special occasions. They'd been laying the guilt on thick for weeks, talking about how much they missed me, how busy I'd been with school, how they barely got to see me anymore. What I didn't realize until later was that this was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. I should have been suspicious when they invited my extended family over for Easter dinner. My Aunt Caroline and Uncle James drove down from Portland with my cousins. My grandmother flew in from Phoenix. Even my father's brother Michael, who usually avoided family gatherings like the plague, showed up with his wife and their twin boys. This wasn't just a holiday meal. This was a full-scale family reunion, and I was apparently the guest of honor. "We're so proud of our college girl," my Aunt Caroline gushed as she hugged me in the entryway. "Patricia's been telling us all about how well you're doing at Riverside." My grandmother, who was never one to mince words, looked me up and down approvingly. "You look healthy, dear. College life suits you. I hope you're not getting distracted by boys and parties, like so many young people do these days." That should have been my first clue about what was coming. Dinner conversation flowed easily at first. Everyone wanted to hear about my classes, my professors, my plans for summer break. I found myself relaxing, remembering why I loved these family gatherings when I was younger. There was something comforting about being surrounded by people who'd known me my entire life, who remembered my childhood obsessions and embarrassing phases and still loved me anyway. But then my cousin Derek, who was a year older and had just started his junior year at Stanford, brought up dating. "So Alexis, are you seeing anyone special at school?" he asked with that slightly teasing tone that older cousins always use when they think they're being clever. The entire table went quiet, completely silent. Forks stopped midway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even my little cousins, who'd been chattering nonstop about their Easter egg hunt earlier, seemed to sense the sudden tension in the room. I looked around the table and realized that everyone was staring at me with these expectant expressions, like they were waiting for me to make some kind of confession or announcement. My mother had this tight smile that I'd learned to recognize as her "I'm trying to control the situation" face. My father was cutting his ham with more focus than the task required. Yeah, actually," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I've been dating someone for a few months now. Her name is Zara." The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Glances were exchanged around the table, the kind of quick, meaningful looks that pass between family members when they've clearly discussed something beforehand. My grandmother's eyebrows shot up. My Aunt Caroline's smile became strained. Uncle Michael actually set down his fork and leaned back in his chair like he was settling in for a show. "Tell us about her," my grandmother said in that deceptively sweet voice she used when she was fishing for information she could later use against you. I should have deflected, should have changed the subject, or given vague, non-committal answers. Instead, I made the mistake of thinking I could win them over the same way I'd been trying to win over my parents, by talking about Zara's best qualities and hoping they'd see past their initial judgments. "She's amazing," I said, and I could hear the genuine affection in my own voice. "She's studying computer science, and she's incredibly smart. She works 2 jobs to pay for school, volunteers at an animal shelter on weekends, and she's one of the kindest people I've ever met." "Computer science," my Uncle James repeated, like I'd just told him she was studying professional dragon slaying. "That's unusual for a girl." "What do her parents do?" my Aunt Caroline asked, and there was something in her tone that made my stomach clench. We haven't really talked about that much," I admitted. "She's pretty private about her family." More glances around the table. My mother cleared her throat. "Alexis, honey, we've been meaning to talk to you about this relationship," she said, and her voice had that carefully modulated tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news while trying to sound caring and concerned. That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't a spontaneous family gathering. This was an intervention. They'd all been brought in as backup, as additional voices to help convince me that I was making a terrible mistake. "We're worried about you," my father chimed in. "You're at such an important point in your life, and we want to make sure you're making decisions that will serve your best interests in the long run." My cousin Derek, who'd apparently been briefed on his role in this ambush, nodded sagely. "I've seen guys at Stanford get completely derailed by relationships with the wrong people. It's really sad to watch." "The wrong people?" I repeated, and I could feel my voice getting sharper. "What exactly makes someone the wrong person?" "Well," my grandmother said, settling into her favorite role as the family's moral authority, "when someone is secretive about their background, that's usually a red flag. Good families raise children to be proud of where they come from." "Maybe she's not secretive," I shot back. "Maybe she just doesn't think her family's net worth is the most interesting thing about her." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and I immediately regretted them. Not because they weren't true, but because I could see I'd just confirmed what everyone at the table already believed, that I was being defensive because I knew they were right. "Alexis," my mother said in her most patient voice, "we've met this girl. We've seen how she presents herself. The tattoos, the piercings, the way she dresses. These are choices that say something about a person's values and judgment." "They say she's not afraid to express herself," I countered. "They say she's confident enough to be authentic instead of trying to fit into some narrow definition of what's acceptable. They say she has no respect for professional standards or social norms," my father said firmly. "They say she's the kind of person who will hold you back when you're trying to build a career and a reputation." That's when I lost it. Completely, utterly lost it in a way I'd never done before at a family gathering. "Are you kidding me right now?" I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "You're all sitting here judging someone you barely know based on how she looks? And you think I'm the one with questionable judgment?" "Sit down, Alexis," my father said in his authoritative voice. "You're making a scene." "Good. Maybe it's time someone made a scene. Maybe it's time someone called out how superficial and judgmental this family really is." The room erupted into chaos. Multiple relatives started talking at once, some trying to calm me down, others defending the family's position, my little cousins asking their parents why everyone was yelling. Through it all, I could see my mother's face getting redder and more pinched, and my father's jaw setting in that way that meant he was about to lay down the law. "Enough," he shouted, and his voice cut through all the other noise. "This is exactly what we were afraid of. This girl has completely changed you, Alexis. The daughter we raised would never speak to her family this way. Maybe the daughter you raised was just too scared to stand up for what she believed in," I shot back. That's when my grandmother decided to deliver what she clearly thought would be the killing blow. "Alexis, dear, I think you need to consider the possibility that this girl is using you. Girls from certain backgrounds, they often see college relationships as opportunities for social climbing. She's probably hoping you'll introduce her to the right people, help her network her way into a better life." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I looked around the table at all these people who claimed to love me, who had just spent 20 minutes systematically tearing apart someone I cared about based on nothing but assumptions and prejudices. "You're all unbelievable," I said quietly, "absolutely unbelievable." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, ignoring the chorus of voices calling after me to come back, to be reasonable, to think about what I was throwing away. As I reached the entryway, I heard my mother's voice rising above the rest. "Don't you dare walk out on your family over some girl you barely know." I turned around one last time and looked at all of them. My parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. People who'd been constants in my life for 19 years, who'd celebrated my birthdays and graduations and achievements. People I'd trusted to love me unconditionally. "The problem isn't that I barely know her," I said. "The problem is that I barely know you." And then I left, driving back to campus with tears streaming down my face, and my phone buzzing nonstop with increasingly angry messages from my parents. I had no idea that I'd just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The fallout from Easter dinner was immediate and brutal. By the time I got back to my dorm room that night, I had 17 missed calls from my mother, 12 text messages from various family members, and a voicemail from my father that was so cold it made my blood freeze. Alexis, this behavior is completely unacceptable. You owe your mother and your entire family an apology for your outburst today. We raised you better than this, and frankly, I'm embarrassed by how you conducted yourself. Call us when you're ready to have a mature conversation about your future. I sat on my narrow dorm bed, still in the dress I'd worn to dinner, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my family clearly, not through the rose-colored glasses of childhood love and loyalty, but as the judgmental, controlling people they apparently were when their vision of perfection was threatened. But even more than the anger, I felt this crushing sense of isolation. These people had been my entire support system for 19 years. They'd paid for my education, cheered at my graduations, been there for every milestone in crisis. The idea of being cut off from all of that felt terrifying and impossible. I didn't tell Zara about the dinner immediately. How could I? How do you explain to someone you care about that your entire family had spent an hour systematically dissecting their character based on their appearance? How do you admit that the people who raised you are exactly the kind of small-minded bigots you've always claimed to be above? Instead, I threw myself into the end of the semester with manic intensity. Final exams were coming up, and I used them as an excuse to avoid difficult conversations with everyone. My family, Zara, even myself. I spent 14-hour days in the library, survived on energy drinks and determination, and told myself that if I could just get through the next few weeks, somehow everything would work itself out. But Zara wasn't stupid. She could tell something was wrong. "You've been weird since Easter," she said one night as we were studying together in the computer lab. She was working on some complex programming assignment that looked like hieroglyphics to me, but she kept glancing over at my economics textbook with this concerned expression. "I'm just stressed about finals," I said, not looking up from my notes. "Bullshit." She closed her laptop and turned to face me fully. "You've been avoiding me for 2 weeks. Every time I try to make plans, you have some excuse about studying or papers or group projects. Did something happen at home?" I finally looked at her, really looked at her, and felt my carefully constructed wall of denial start to crumble. She was wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, her purple-streaked hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup except for the black eyeliner she always wore. She looked beautiful and genuine, and nothing like the calculating social climber my family had painted her as. "My family doesn't like you," I said quietly. "Actually, that's putting it mildly. They hate you. They think you're using me, that you're going to ruin my life, that I should break up with you immediately." I expected her to get angry or defensive. Instead, she just nodded like this wasn't particularly surprising news. "I figured as much," she said. "The way they looked at me that night at your house. I've seen that look before. People make assumptions based on how I look, how I dress, where they think I come from. Usually I don't care, but this time it matters because it affects us, because it affects you." She reached over and took my hand. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" That's when I realized I'd been waiting for someone else to solve this problem for me. I'd been hoping my family would come around, or that Zara would somehow prove herself to them, or that the whole situation would just magically resolve itself. But sitting there in the fluorescent-lit computer lab at 11 o'clock at night, I understood that this was my choice to make. "I want to be with you," I said, "but I don't know how to choose between you and my family." "Maybe you don't have to choose," she said. "Maybe they just need more time. Or maybe there's something that would help them see me differently." She paused for a long moment, like she was debating whether to say something. "Actually, there is something I should probably tell you about my family situation." My heart stopped. This was it, the revelation I'd been dreading. She was going to tell me that my parents' suspicions were right, that she came from some terrible background that would validate all their worst assumptions. I haven't been entirely honest about why I don't talk about my family much, she continued. It's not because I'm ashamed of them or because there's some big scandal. It's because, well, it's complicated. What kind of complicated? She took a deep breath. My father is Nathan Blackstone. The name meant nothing to me, and my confusion must have shown on my face. Blackstone Technologies, she clarified. Blackstone Ventures. Blackstone Industries. I stared at her blankly. I'd heard those company names before. They were all over the tech news, major players in Silicon Valley. But I'd never connected them to a single person, let alone to my girlfriend, who worked at a coffee shop and stressed about textbook costs. I don't understand, I said slowly. My father is one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in the country, she said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. He founded Blackstone Technologies when he was 23, sold it for $8 billion when I was in high school, and now he runs a venture capital firm that's worth, well, let's just say Forbes keeps trying to get him to do interviews about his net worth. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. You're telling me your dad is a billionaire? Multi-billionaire, technically. She ran her hands through her hair, looking suddenly exhausted. And before you ask, yes, he could easily pay for my college tuition without blinking. He could buy me a house, a car, whatever I wanted. He's offered 1,000 times. Then why are you working 2 jobs? Why are you stressing about money? Because I don't want his money. I don't want people to look at me and see dollar signs instead of seeing me. I don't want professors giving me better grades because they think I might donate to the university someday. I don't want friends who are only interested in what I can do for them. She looked at me with those dark eyes that always seemed to see too much. And I definitely don't want to date someone who's only with me because of my father's bank account. Is that why you didn't tell me? I asked, and I could hear the hurt in my own voice. You thought I was that shallow? No, she said quickly. God, no. Alexis, you're one of the few people I've ever met who clearly didn't give a damn about any of that stuff. You liked me for me, exactly as I am. That's why I fell for you so hard. Then why keep it secret? Because I've seen what happens when people find out. Everything changes. Suddenly, every conversation becomes about money or business or what my father can do for them. People start treating me like I'm made of glass or like I'm some kind of prize to be won. I just wanted to be normal for once in my life. I sat there trying to process this information, feeling like my entire understanding of our relationship had just been turned upside down. The girl I'd been dating for months, the girl my parents thought was some kind of gold-digging social climber, was actually richer than anyone in my family could even imagine. There's something else, she said quietly, something that might actually solve your family problem if you want it to. What do you mean? My father is having his annual charity gala next month. It's this huge event. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders, all the most influential people in the country. He's been asking me to bring someone, and I've been avoiding it because I hate those kinds of events. But if you wanted to... She trailed off, but I could see where this was going. You're saying if my parents met your father, if they saw who you really are, they might change their minds about you. I'm saying that people like your parents tend to respect money and power above everything else. If they realized they'd been trying to break up their daughter with someone whose family could buy their entire neighborhood without thinking twice about it, they might reassess their position. It felt mercenary and calculated, but I couldn't deny the appeal. The idea of walking into my parents' house with Zara on my arm, of watching their faces when they realized exactly how wrong they'd been about everything, was almost irresistible. Would you want to do that? I asked. Subject yourself to that kind of circus just to prove a point to my family? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. I'd do it for you, she said finally. If it means we don't have to keep hiding and sneaking around, if it means you don't have to choose between me and your family, then yes, I'd do it. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what kind of person I wanted to be. Did I want to be someone who used her girlfriend's family connections to win approval from people who'd already shown their true colors? Or did I want to be someone who stood up for what was right regardless of the consequences? But as I thought about my parents' faces at that Easter dinner, about the way they'd systematically torn Zara apart without knowing anything real about her, I realized that maybe it wasn't about using connections. Maybe it was about giving them the chance to see how spectacularly wrong they'd been about everything. The decision to attend Nathan Blackstone's charity gala felt like stepping off a cliff. Once I agreed to go, there was no turning back, no pretending this was just a casual relationship that my parents could dismiss. This was me officially choosing Zara over their approval, and we all knew it. The weeks leading up to the gala were a whirlwind of preparation and mounting tension. Zara had to call her father's personal assistant to arrange for my invitation, which apparently required a background check that made me feel like I was applying for government clearance. The event was being held at the Meridian Grand Hotel in downtown San Francisco, and the guest list read like a who's who of American power brokers. "Are you sure about this?" Zara asked me for the 100th time as we sat in her dorm room, looking at the formal invitation that had arrived by courier. The paper was so thick and expensive, it felt like fabric, and the gold embossing caught the light when I tilted it. "Once we walk into that ballroom together, there's no hiding anymore. Everyone's going to know who I am, who my family is. Your parents will definitely find out." I looked at her sitting cross-legged on her narrow dorm bed, wearing ripped jeans and an oversized sweater, looking nothing like someone who could casually attend events that cost more per plate than most people made in a month. The contrast between who she was in this moment and who she would become at that gala felt surreal. "I'm sure," I said, though my stomach was churning with anxiety. "But there's something I need to do first." That something was calling my parents and telling them exactly what was about to happen. Not asking for permission, not seeking their approval, but informing them that their daughter was about to attend one of the most exclusive social events in the country with the girlfriend they'd spent months trying to convince me to dump. I made the call on a Thursday evening, sitting in the common room of my dorm while my roommate was at her evening biology lab. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say a dozen times, but when my mother's familiar voice answered after 2 rings, all my careful preparation went out the window. "Alexis." "Honey, I'm so glad you called. We've been giving you space like you asked. But we really need to talk about what happened at Easter. Your father and I have been discussing some compromises we might be able to make regarding your situation." Her tone was conciliatory, almost relieved, like she thought I was calling to surrender. It made what I was about to do feel even more explosive. "Mom, I'm not calling to apologize," I said, cutting her off before she could continue with whatever script she'd prepared. "I'm calling to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the pause that meant she was probably signaling to my father that this wasn't the conversation they'd been hoping for. "I'm attending a charity gala this weekend in San Francisco. It's being hosted by Nathan Blackstone of Blackstone Technologies. I'm going as Zara's date." Silence. Complete, absolute silence that stretched on so long I actually checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Mom, are you there?" "Nathan Blackstone," she repeated slowly, like she was testing the words to make sure she'd heard them correctly. "The Nathan Blackstone?" "Yes." "Alexis, what are you talking about? How do you even know who Nathan Blackstone is? And what does this have to do with that girl you've been dating?" I took a deep breath. Zara is Nathan Blackstone's daughter. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. I had to hold the phone away from my ear as my mother's voice rose to near shrieking levels, calling for my father, demanding that I repeat what I'd just said, asking if this was some kind of joke. In the background, I could hear my father's heavy footsteps approaching, then his voice demanding to know what was going on. "Put me on speaker," I said, when the initial chaos died down. "Alexis," my father's voice came through the phone, tight with controlled anger. "What exactly are you trying to tell us?" "I'm telling you that for the past 6 months, You've been trying to break me up with the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in America. I'm telling you that the girl you called trash, the girl you said was using me, the girl you accused of being a social climber, is worth more money than our entire extended family will see in 10 lifetimes. Another silence, but this one was different. This was the silence of people rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew. That's impossible, my mother said weakly. She works at a coffee shop. She dresses like someone who doesn't want to be judged based on her father's net worth, I finished. Like someone who wants to be valued for who she is, not what she can buy. Like someone who's been working 2 jobs to put herself through school because she refuses to take money from her family. But why wouldn't she tell us? My father asked, and I could hear the gears turning in his head. Why would she keep something like that secret? Maybe because she knew exactly how you'd react. Maybe because she's dealt with people like you her entire life. People who only care about her when they find out she's rich. Maybe because she wanted to see if you could love me enough to accept someone you thought was beneath your social status. That hit home. I could practically feel them flinching through the phone. "Alexis, honey," my mother said, and her voice had completely changed. Gone was the cold disapproval, replaced by something that sounded almost frantic. "If this is true, if she's really Nathan Blackstone's daughter, then we need to talk. We need to discuss this as a family." "No," I said firmly, "we really don't. You've already shown me exactly who you are and what your love is worth. You've made it crystal clear that your approval depends entirely on someone's bank account and social connections." "That's not fair," my father protested. "We were trying to protect you. We thought she was taking advantage of you." "You thought she was poor," I shot back. "That's what you couldn't handle. Not that she was taking advantage of me, not that she was a bad person, but that she didn't fit your narrow definition of successful. And now that you know she's richer than you ever dreamed of being, suddenly you want to have a family discussion about it." "Alexis, please," my mother's voice was pleading now. "You have to understand our position. We just want what's best for you." "What's best for me is being with someone who loves me for who I am, not someone who meets your social requirements. What's best for me is having a family that supports my choices instead of trying to control them." I paused, gathering courage for what I was about to say next. "I'm going to that gala, and I'm going to have an amazing time with the woman I love. And afterward, Zara and I are going to build a life together with or without your blessing. The only question is whether you want to be part of that life, or whether you want to keep being the people who judge others based on appearances and assumptions." "Wait," my father said urgently. "Just wait. Don't hang up. We can fix this. We can make this right." "Can you?" I asked. "Can you really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the only thing that's changed is your perception of Zara's usefulness to you. A week ago she was trash, who was going to ruin my life. Now she's Nathan Blackstone's daughter who might be able to open doors for you." "That's not acceptance, Dad. That's opportunism." "That's not true," my mother protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Tell me honestly. If Zara was exactly the same person but her father was a janitor instead of a billionaire, would you be asking for family discussions right now? Would you be talking about making things right?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. "I'll send you photos from the gala. Maybe seeing us together in that ballroom, with all those important people you're so desperate to impress, will help you understand what you almost threw away." I hung up before they could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something that felt like grief. I had just severed the last threads of my old relationship with my parents, the relationship built on their expectations and my compliance. Whatever came next would have to be built on entirely different terms. My phone started ringing immediately, them calling back, probably panicking about how to fix this situation now that the stakes had completely changed. I turned it off and sat in the empty common room, feeling hollow and liberated at the same time. When Zara found me there an hour later, she took one look at my face and knew exactly what had happened. You told them, she said, sitting down beside me on the worn couch. I told them. And you were right about how they'd react. Suddenly they want to discuss things as a family and, quote, make things right. Funny how their tune changed the second they found out your net worth. She pulled me against her side, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of coffee that always clung to her clothes. Are you okay? She asked softly. I will be, I said. After Saturday night, after we walk into that ballroom together and I introduce you as my girlfriend to everyone who matters in this country, I think I'll be more than okay. And if your parents try to crash the party, literally or figuratively, I smiled for the first time in hours. Then they'll get to see exactly what they've been missing, and exactly what they'll never deserve to have back. The gala was 3 days away, and I could already feel everything changing. The night of the gala arrived with all the weight and ceremony of a coronation. I'd spent the entire day in a state of nervous energy that felt like electricity running through my veins. This wasn't just a fancy party. This was the moment where everything I'd been building toward for months would either vindicate my choices or expose me as a naive college student who'd gotten in way over her head. Zara had arranged for us to get ready at her father's penthouse in downtown San Francisco, a sprawling apartment that took up the entire top floor of one of those gleaming towers that pierce the city's skyline. When the private elevator opened directly into the foyer, I stepped into a world I'd only seen in movies. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, art that belonged in museums, furniture that probably cost more than my parents' annual salary. Welcome to the circus, Zara said dryly, watching my face as I took in the opulence. This is why I live in a dorm room and work at a coffee shop. All of this, she gestured around the space. It's beautiful, but it's not real life. Not for me, anyway. A team of stylists had been assembled to transform us for the evening. Hair, makeup, wardrobe, the works. Zara submitted to the process with resigned familiarity, but I could see the tension in her shoulders as they worked to cover her tattoos with specially formulated makeup and style her purple-streaked hair into something more appropriate for the event. You don't have to do this, I told her, as a stylist held up different jewelry options against her neck. We could still back out. She caught my eye in the mirror where a makeup artist was carefully applying foundation to conceal the small scar through her eyebrow where one of her piercings usually sat. I'm not doing this for them, she said quietly. I'm doing this for you. And maybe, if I'm being honest, I'm doing it to prove a point about how ridiculous this whole world is. My own transformation was less dramatic but no less surreal. The stylists had selected a midnight blue gown that fit like it had been designed specifically for my body, which it probably had been based on the measurements Zara's father's assistant had somehow obtained. The fabric moved like liquid, and when I looked in the full-length mirror, I barely recognized myself. You look like a queen, Zara said, appearing behind me in her own gown, deep emerald green that brought out the subtle gold flecks in her dark eyes. With her tattoos hidden and her hair swept into an elegant updo, she looked like she'd stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. But I could still see my Zara in the way she moved, the slight defiance in her posture that suggested she was wearing this persona-like armor. Nathan Blackstone himself appeared just as we were finishing our preparations, and I immediately understood where Zara got her intensity. He was shorter than I'd expected, probably in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're the smartest person in most rooms. When Zara introduced us, he studied me with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. So you're the young woman who's captured my daughter's attention, he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. She's told me a great deal about you, and about your family's concerns regarding your relationship. Heat flooded my cheeks. Mr. Blackstone, I'm sorry if our situation has caused any. He held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. Alexis. May I call you Alexis? Good. Let me tell you something about my daughter. She's one of the most discerning people I know. If she's chosen to trust you with who she really is, that tells me everything I need to know about your character. The opinions of people who judge others based on appearances are irrelevant to me. He paused, his expression softening slightly as he looked at Zara. What matters to me is that she's happy. And she's happier with you than I've seen her in years. The ride to the hotel in Nathan's private car was a study in contrasts. Outside the tinted windows, San Francisco flowed past in all its gritty, beautiful reality. Inside, we sat in leather seats that probably cost more than most people's cars, heading to an event where the collective net worth of the attendees could fund small countries. Last chance to run, Zara murmured as the Meridian Grand Hotel came into view, its entrance ablaze with lights and lined with photographers. Not a chance, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The red carpet was everything I'd imagined, and nothing like I'd expected. The cameras were blinding, the noise overwhelming, but Zara moved through it all with practiced ease, her hands steady in mine as we posed for photos. When reporters called out questions about her mysterious +1, she simply smiled and said, "This is my girlfriend, Alexis Thornfield." Just like that, our relationship was public record, documented by dozens of cameras and broadcast to whatever audience followed this kind of event. There was no taking it back now, no pretending this was casual or temporary. Inside the ballroom, the gala was a masterpiece of orchestrated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in silk, each centerpiece a work of art that would have looked at home in a gallery. The guests moved in carefully choreographed patterns, senators chatting with tech moguls, celebrities mingling with philanthropists, everyone playing their part in this elaborate theater of power and influence. And at the center of it all was Zara, transformed but unmistakably herself, introducing me to titans of industry and political figures whose names I recognized from newspaper headlines. With each introduction, I watched people's faces change as they processed who she was, who her father was, and by extension, who I must be to be here with her. Alexis is studying business at Riverside University, she would say, and suddenly these impossibly important people were asking about my studies, my career plans, my thoughts on various economic trends. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But the real moment of truth came when I spotted a familiar face across the crowded ballroom. Senator Margaret Chen, who represented our district and was a close family friend of the Thornfields. She'd been at our house for dinner parties, had watched me grow up, had probably heard all about my concerning relationship choices from my parents. Our eyes met across the room, and I watched her expression shift from polite social smile to confusion to something approaching shock as she recognized me. She began making her way through the crowd toward us, and I felt my pulse spike. "Alexis?" Senator Chen's voice carried a note of bewilderment as she approached. "What on earth are you doing here?" Before I could respond, Zara stepped forward with that confident smile she wore like a shield. "Senator Chen, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Zara Blackstone, Nathan's daughter, and this is my girlfriend, Alexis Thornfield." I watched Senator Chen's political instincts kick in as she processed this information. Her smile became more genuine, her handshake firmer as she shook Zara's hand. "Ms. Blackstone, of course. I should have recognized you from the photos in the society pages. And Alexis, my dear, what a delightful surprise to see you here. Your parents must be so proud." The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. 3 months ago, this same woman had probably nodded sympathetically as my parents complained about my poor judgment in dating choices. Now she was acting like my presence at this exclusive event was the most natural thing in the world. "Actually," I said, finding my voice and my courage, "my parents don't know I'm here tonight. They've been rather disapproving of my relationship with Zara." Senator Chen's political smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. Well, I'm sure any misunderstandings will be cleared up soon. Young love can be complicated, but family always comes first. Does it? Zara asked, her tone pleasant but with an edge that only I could detect. Even when family members judge people based on assumptions rather than character? The conversation continued for several more minutes, a polite verbal fencing match where everyone said exactly what they meant, while pretending to mean something else entirely. But I could see the calculations happening behind Senator Chen's eyes, the rapid reassessment of relationships and loyalties that people like her excelled at. As she excused herself to mingle with other constituents, I knew exactly what would happen next. Within hours, my parents would receive a very interesting phone call from their old family friend, full of casual mentions of seeing me at the Blackstone Gala, and thoughtful observations about what a lovely couple Zara and I made. Well, Zara said as we watched Senator Chen disappear into the crowd, that should speed things up considerably. She was right. My phone, which I'd turned back on for the evening, was already starting to buzz with notifications. But for once, I didn't care about my parents' reactions or their inevitable attempts to control the narrative. Tonight, in this glittering ballroom surrounded by the most powerful people in the country, I was exactly where I belonged, standing beside the woman I loved, unapologetic about my choices and unafraid of the consequences. The real fireworks were just beginning. The morning after the gala hit like a tsunami of consequences I wasn't prepared for, despite knowing they were coming. I woke up in Zara's dorm room to the sound of my phone vibrating so aggressively against her nightstand that it sounded like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. The display showed 43 missed calls, 67 text messages, and a voicemail box that was completely full. "Let me guess," Zara said groggily from beside me, "your parents saw the photos." The photos. I'd almost forgotten about those in the euphoria of the previous evening. But of course, the society pages had been busy overnight. The San Francisco Chronicle's website featured a full gallery titled "Blackstone Gala Brings Out Tech Royalty," and there we were in at least a dozen shots. Zara and I on the red carpet chatting with senators, dancing together in the ballroom. In every image, we looked like we belonged there, like we were part of that rarefied world of power and influence. The comments section was already buzzing with speculation about Nathan Blackstone's mysterious daughter and her equally mysterious girlfriend. Someone had apparently done enough digging to identify me as Alexis Thornfield, business student at Riverside University, which meant my full name was now permanently linked to this story on the internet. My parents' texts started out frantic and escalated to furious as the night progressed. "Call us immediately. We need to explain everything." "Alexis, Senator Chen called. We know you were at the Blackstone Gala. Why didn't you tell us? Your father is beside himself. Please call us back. We're driving up to campus. We'll be there by noon." That last message had been sent at 6 a.m., which meant they were probably already on the road, probably had been driving through the night in their desperation to reach me before I could do any more damage to their carefully constructed worldview. "They're coming here," I told Zara, showing her the screen. "They'll be here in a few hours." She sat up, suddenly alert. "Do you want to face them? Or do you want to disappear for the weekend while they cool off?" The old Alexis would have hidden. Would have found some excuse to avoid the confrontation, would have let them stew in their anger and confusion until I could figure out how to smooth things over. But something had fundamentally changed last night. Standing in that ballroom, introducing Zara as my girlfriend to some of the most important people in the country, had crystallized something inside me. "I want to face them," I said. "I want them to look me in the eye and explain why they're suddenly interested in having a relationship with someone they spent months trying to convince me to dump." We spent the morning preparing for what felt like a battle. Zara offered to be there for moral support, but I knew this was something I needed to handle alone. This was my family, my mess to clean up or definitively end. They arrived at exactly noon, looking like they'd driven through the night without stopping. My mother's usually perfect hair was disheveled. My father's shirt was wrinkled. and both of them had the wild-eyed look of people whose entire understanding of reality had been upended in the span of 12 hours. I met them in the parking lot outside my dorm, not wanting to have this conversation where my hallmates could overhear. The moment they saw me, my mother rushed forward like she was going to hug me, then stopped abruptly when she remembered we were in the middle of a massive family crisis. "Alexis," my father said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "we need to talk. All of this. Last night, we had no idea." "No idea about what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. I wanted to make them say it out loud. "About who she is," my mother said, and there was something almost pleading in her voice. "About her family, about what this relationship really means." "Honey, if we'd known—" "If you'd known she was rich, you mean?" I interrupted. "If you'd known her father could buy and sell our entire neighborhood, then you would have been more supportive." "That's not what we mean," my father protested, but the protest sounded hollow even to him. "Isn't it? Because 3 months ago you called her trash. You said she was using me, that she was going to ruin my life. You kicked me out of Easter dinner for defending her. And now, suddenly, after seeing some photos of us at a fancy party, you want to talk and work things out." My mother's composure cracked. "We were trying to protect you. We thought she was taking advantage of you, that she was some kind of gold digger," I supplied. "Social climber? Those were your exact words, Mom. And now that you know she's the one with the gold, suddenly your whole perspective has changed." "We made mistakes," my father admitted, and I could see how much the words cost him. Richard Thornfield was not a man who admitted mistakes easily. "We judged her too quickly, based on appearances. We should have gotten to know her better before making assumptions." "You should have trusted me," I shot back. "You should have trusted that I'm smart enough to know the difference between someone who cares about me and someone who's using me. But instead, you decided that your narrow view of what's acceptable was more important than your daughter's happiness." We stood there in the parking lot, 3 people who'd loved each other for 19 years, trying to figure out if there was any way to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. "What do you want from us?" my mother asked finally, tears streaming down her face. "Tell us how to fix this. Tell us what you need us to do." It was the question I'd been waiting for, but now that it was here, I found myself struggling for an answer. What did I want? An apology? A promise that they'd never judge my choices again? Some guarantee that they'd treat Zara with the respect she deserved? "I want you to understand that nothing has actually changed," I said slowly. "Zara is the same person she was yesterday, the same person she was when you met her 6 months ago. The only thing that's different is your perception of her value to you, and that should tell you everything you need to know about yourselves." My father flinched like I'd slapped him. "That's not fair, Alexis. We're trying to make amends here. Are you? Or are you trying to position yourselves advantageously now that you know I'm dating someone with connections you could benefit from?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I could see them both struggling with it, trying to find a way to deny it that didn't sound obviously false. "We love you," my mother said desperately. "Whatever mistakes we've made, whatever we got wrong, we love you and we want you in our lives." "Do you? Because for the past 6 months, you've made it very clear that your love comes with conditions. That you only want me in your lives if I make choices you approve of, date people you deem acceptable, live the life you've planned out for me." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to continue dating Zara, and hopefully it will turn into something permanent. I'm going to build a life with her that makes both of us happy, regardless of whether that life meets your standards. And you're going to have to decide if you can genuinely accept that, not because she's rich, not because her father could be useful to you, but because you trust me to make good decisions about my own life." "Of course we can accept that," my father said quickly, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not finished. If you decide you can accept my choices and treat Zara with the respect she deserves, the same respect you'd show anyone I cared about, then we can try to rebuild our relationship. But it will be a different relationship than the one we had before. I'm not your little girl anymore, and I'm not going to let you control my life through guilt or financial manipulation. And if we can't accept that, my mother asked, though she looked like she already knew the answer, then we're done, permanently. Because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn approval from people who've already shown me that their love is conditional on my compliance. They left without giving me an answer, promising to think about everything and be in touch soon. I watched their car disappear around the corner and felt simultaneously heartbroken and liberated. When I got back to Zara's room, she was sitting on her bed with her laptop, scrolling through news coverage of the gala. "How did it go?" she asked, closing the computer and giving me her full attention. I told them the truth, I said, collapsing onto the bed beside her. About themselves, about what they really care about what our relationship is going to look like going forward. And now we wait to see if they're capable of genuine change, or if they're just going to try to manipulate this situation to their advantage. She pulled me against her side, and I breathed in the familiar comfort of her presence. "You know," she said softly, "whatever they decide, you're not alone in this. You've got me, and you've got a future that's entirely yours to create." "I know," I said, and for the first time in months, I really meant it. I think that's what scares them the most. The silence from my parents lasted exactly 1 week. 7 days of radio silence while they presumably wrestled with the new reality I'd presented them. During that week, life took on a strange quality of suspended animation. I went to classes, studied for finals, worked on papers, but underneath it all was this constant awareness that everything was about to change one way or another. What I didn't expect was how quickly the ripple effects would spread beyond just my immediate family. It started with my cousin Derek calling on a Tuesday evening, his voice carefully casual in that way that meant he was fishing for information. "Hey, Alexis. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing after all the family drama at Easter." "I'm fine, Derek, thanks for asking. So, I saw some interesting photos online. You and your girlfriend at some fancy charity thing in San Francisco?" I could practically hear him trying to work up the courage to ask what he really wanted to know. Derek had always been the golden child of our extended family, Stanford student, pre-med track, everything my parents wished I was. The idea that his supposedly wayward cousin was suddenly moving in circles he could only dream of accessing must have been eating at him. The Blackstone Gala, yes, it was quite an event. Right, the Blackstone Gala, that's a pretty big deal from what I hear. How does someone get invited to something like that? By dating the host's daughter, I said simply, enjoying his stunned silence. The next call came from my Aunt Caroline, who was much more direct in her approach. "Alexis, honey, I just got off the phone with your mother, and I have to say I think there might have been some misunderstandings about this young woman you're seeing. Perhaps we all judged too quickly based on first impressions." "Perhaps you did," I agreed. "Well, the important thing is that we're family, and family supports each other. I'd love to have you both over for dinner sometime soon. Maybe we could all get to know Zara better." It was fascinating to watch the domino effect in real time. Word had apparently spread through our extended family network that I was dating someone with serious social and financial capital, and suddenly everyone wanted to reassess their previous positions. The same relatives who'd spent Easter dinner lecturing me about my poor judgment were now calling to suggest family gatherings and extend olive branches. The most surreal call came from my grandmother. "Alexis, dear, I've been thinking about our conversation at Easter, and I realize I may have spoken too hastily. Sometimes us older folks get set in our ways, you know. Perhaps I should meet this young woman properly before forming any opinions." "Grandma, you did meet her. You spent 20 minutes telling me she was probably a gold digger." "Well, clearly I was mistaken about that particular concern," she said with a laugh that sounded forced. "Maybe we could arrange a proper introduction?" I'd love to learn more about her family background. I'm sure she would. But the most telling response came from my parents themselves, when they finally broke their silence. Instead of calling or showing up unannounced like they had before, they sent a formal invitation, an actual printed card, inviting Zara and me to dinner at Meridian, the most expensive restaurant in our hometown. They want to meet on neutral territory, I told Zara as we looked at the elegant cardstock. Somewhere public where they can't completely lose their composure if things go badly. Or somewhere impressive enough that they think it will show me they're not intimidated by my family's money, Zara replied with a wry smile. Though Meridian is cute. My father takes me there sometimes when he's feeling nostalgic about simpler times. The fact that the most expensive restaurant in my hometown was a place Nathan Blackstone visited for nostalgia perfectly illustrated the gap between our worlds. But I was grateful that Zara never made me feel small because of it. We arrived at Meridian on a Saturday evening, both of us dressed carefully for the occasion. I'd chosen a simple black dress that was elegant without being flashy, while Zara wore a navy blazer over dark jeans, professional enough to show respect for the occasion, casual enough to remind everyone that she wasn't trying to impress anyone. My parents were already seated when we arrived, and I could see they'd put considerable thought into their own presentation. My mother was wearing her best jewelry and the dress she usually reserved for anniversary dinners. My father had on the suit he wore to important business meetings. They looked like they were attending a job interview, which in a way I suppose they were. The first few minutes were painfully awkward, full of the kind of stilted small talk you make with strangers you're trying to impress. My parents asked polite questions about Zara's studies, her career plans, her thoughts on various current events. She answered with equal politeness, but I could see the subtle ways she was testing them, mentioning her volunteer work at the animal shelter to see if they'd connect with her compassion, discussing her programming projects to gauge their reaction to her intelligence. The real test came when my father, emboldened by a glass of wine and apparently forgetting everything that had led to this moment, made the mistake of asking about her family's business. "So Zara, your father's in technology, I understand. That must be fascinating. What exactly does his company do?" It was such a transparent fishing expedition that I almost laughed. My father, who worked for a pharmaceutical company and could barely operate his smartphone, suddenly wanted to discuss the intricacies of tech entrepreneurship. "Which company?" Zara asked innocently. "He's involved with several different ventures these days." "Well, the main one, I suppose, his primary business." That would be Blackstone Ventures, his investment firm. They focus primarily on early-stage tech startups and sustainable energy companies. Though I suppose you could argue that his foundation work is equally important. They're funding several educational initiatives and research projects. She delivered this information matter-of-factly, without boasting or showing off, but the effect on my parents was immediate. My father's eyes widened slightly as he processed the implications of what she'd just said. Investment firms, foundations, multiple companies. This wasn't just wealth. This was generational, empire-building wealth. "That sounds very substantial," my mother managed. "It keeps him busy," Zara agreed. "Though he always says the most important thing is finding ways to use resources responsibly. He's very focused on giving back to the community." I watched my parents exchange glances across the table, the kind of quick, meaningful looks that meant they were rapidly recalibrating their entire approach to this conversation. "That's wonderful," my father said, his voice taking on the hearty tone he used when he was trying to make a good impression on his boss. "Community involvement is so important. We've always tried to instill those values in Alexis." "Have you?" Zara asked, and there was something sharp in her tone that made my stomach clench. "Because, from what I understand, you were quite concerned about Alexis dating someone you perceived as being from a lower socioeconomic background. That doesn't sound like someone who values community involvement over social status." The temperature at the table dropped about 20 degrees. My mother's smile became fixed and brittle, while my father's face flushed red. "Now, that's not entirely fair," he protested. We were concerned about Alexis's future, about making sure she wasn't being taken advantage of. Any parent would have the same concerns. Would they? Zara leaned forward slightly, her gaze direct and unwavering. Because I've known plenty of parents who trust their children's judgment enough to get to know someone before deciding they're unsuitable. I've known parents who value character over bank accounts. Zara, I said quietly, not wanting this to escalate into a full confrontation. No, it's okay, she said, not breaking eye contact with my father. I think it's important to be honest about what happened here. Your parents didn't disapprove of me because they thought I was using you, Alexis. They disapproved of me because they thought I was poor. They made assumptions based on how I looked and decided I wasn't good enough for their daughter. That's not, my mother started. It's exactly what happened, Zara continued calmly, and now that you know I'm not poor, suddenly you want to have dinner and get to know me better. You're not apologizing for your prejudice. You're repositioning yourselves based on new information about my usefulness to you. The silence that followed was deafening. Other diners continued their conversations around us, but at our table, the air was thick with tension and unspoken truths. Finally, my father cleared his throat. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right, and I'm ashamed of that. It was the last thing I'd expected him to say, and I could see it caught Zara off guard, too. We did judge you unfairly, he continued. We made assumptions based on appearances, and we tried to interfere in our daughter's relationship because of those assumptions. That was wrong, and I apologize. My mother looked like she was struggling with her own words, but eventually managed, We love Alexis, and we want her to be happy. We should have trusted her judgment from the beginning. For the first time since we'd sat down, Zara's expression softened slightly. I appreciate you saying that. But I need you to understand that I'm not interested in being accepted because of my family's money. If you can't respect me for who I am as a person, then your approval isn't worth having. We understand, my mother said, and for the first time she sounded like she might actually mean it. The rest of the dinner passed in careful, tentative conversation. Not exactly warm, but not hostile either. It felt like the very beginning of something new, something that might eventually grow into genuine understanding. As we prepared to leave, my father awkwardly shook Zara's hand. I hope we can start over, he said. I hope you'll give us the chance to prove we can do better. We'll see, Zara replied, but her tone wasn't unkind. Walking to our car, I felt emotionally drained, but oddly hopeful. It wasn't the reunion I'd dreamed of, but it was honest in a way our family had never been before. Think they mean it? I asked Zara as we drove back toward campus. I think they're trying to mean it, she said, which is more than I expected. It was a start, not the ending I'd hoped for, but a beginning I could work with. The months following that tense dinner at Meridian became a delicate dance of rebuilding trust and establishing new boundaries. My parents were clearly trying, but their efforts had the awkward quality of people learning to speak a foreign language, technically correct but lacking natural fluency. They would call to check in on my studies, carefully avoiding any direct questions about Zara, while obviously fishing for information about our relationship. They sent graduation announcements to relatives that mentioned, Alexis and her girlfriend Zara will be attending, like they were testing out the words in safe, low-stakes situations. The real progress came in small, almost imperceptible increments. My mother started asking about Zara's classes and volunteer work during our phone calls. My father began including both of us in family event invitations, without the previous caveats about family-only gatherings. They were walking on eggshells, but they were walking in the right direction. Meanwhile, Zara and I were building something solid and real that had nothing to do with either of our family's complications. We'd moved in together off campus for our senior year, splitting a small 2-bedroom apartment that was a significant upgrade from dorm life but still deliberately modest. Zara continued working at the coffee shop despite my gentle suggestions that she didn't need to anymore, and I picked up tutoring work to help cover my share of expenses. I like earning my own way, she explained one evening as we studied together at our second-hand dining table. When my father finally retires and I inherit all of this responsibility, I want to know that I've lived like a normal person first. I want to understand what money actually means to people who have to work for it. It was one of the things I loved most about her, this absolute refusal to take the easy path when she could learn something valuable from the difficult one. But it also meant we existed in this strange bubble where we lived like broke college students, while knowing that financial security was just a phone call away if we ever really needed it. Our social circle had evolved too. Word had inevitably gotten out about Zara's family connections, and we'd had to navigate the sudden interest from classmates who'd previously ignored us. Some people were obviously angling for networking opportunities, but others were genuinely curious about getting to know us better now that they realized there was more to our story than they'd assumed. The most surprising friendship came from an unexpected source. Derek, my cousin who'd initially called to Fish for information about the gala. He showed up at our apartment one weekend, ostensibly to visit family in the area, but really to apologize for his behavior at Easter. I was a complete ass, he admitted, sitting awkwardly on our second-hand couch. I was so focused on competing with you academically that I never bothered to actually get to know you as a person. And when I found out about all this, he gestured vaguely, presumably meaning Zara's background, I realized how shallow I'd been about everything. Derek's friendship became important to both of us, partly because he represented the possibility that other family relationships could be salvaged with enough honest effort, but mostly because he was genuinely funny and kind once he stopped trying to prove he was smarter than everyone else. The bigger test came during spring break of our senior year, when Zara finally decided it was time for me to meet her father properly. Not at a formal event where we were both playing roles, but in his natural habitat, as she put it. Nathan Blackstone's natural habitat turned out to be a sprawling compound in Napa Valley that managed to be both incredibly luxurious and surprisingly understated. The house itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture that seemed to grow organically out of the hillside, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the vineyard views. But inside, it felt like a home rather than a museum, books everywhere, comfortable furniture that showed signs of actual use, family photos scattered on surfaces. "Welcome to the circus, round two," Zara said as we pulled up the long driveway, "but this time at least you know what you're getting into." Nathan greeted us at the door wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt that had clearly seen better days, looking more like a college professor than one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. He hugged Zara with genuine warmth, then turned to me with that same direct gaze I remembered from the gala. "Alexis, I'm glad you could join us. Zara's told me a great deal about how you handled your family situation. That took considerable courage." Over the next 3 days, I got to see a completely different side of both Zara and her father. Away from the public eye, they had an easy, affectionate relationship, built on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. Nathan asked thoughtful questions about my studies and career plans, but unlike my parents' interrogations, his questions felt like genuine curiosity rather than evaluation. The conversations that weekend ranged from philosophical discussions about wealth and responsibility to heated debates about the latest political developments, to silly arguments about which streaming service had the best original content. Nathan was brilliant and intimidating, but he was also warm and funny in a way that reminded me constantly of where Zara got her best qualities. "You know," he said one evening as we sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyard, "Zara's never brought anyone home before, not once in all her years of dating." "Dad," Zara warned from her spot curled up in an oversized chair. "I'm just saying," he continued with a grin, "that tells me something important about how she feels about you. And watching you two together this weekend tells me something important about the kind of person you are." "What's that?" I asked. "That you see her for who she really is, not for what she represents or what she could do for you. That's rarer than you might think. The weekend also gave me insight into the pressures Zara had been living with her entire life. Nathan's phone rang constantly, with calls from business partners, politicians, and charity organizations seeking his involvement in various projects. Even on vacation, he was fielding requests for meetings, donations, and endorsements. The weight of being responsible for that much money and influence was something I'd never fully understood before. "This is what I'll inherit someday," Zara told me one morning as we walked through the vineyard while her father took yet another urgent call. "Not just the money, but the responsibility for using it well. Every decision will affect thousands of people, and everyone will have an opinion about whether I'm doing it right." "Are you ready for that?" I asked. "I don't know if anyone can be ready for something like that," she replied. "But I'm trying to prepare myself by learning to make good decisions about smaller things first, like choosing the right person to build a life with." She stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression serious but soft. "I know this is complicated, Alexis. I know that being with me means signing up for a level of public scrutiny and pressure that most people never have to deal with. I know that your life will never be completely private or normal if we stay together." "Are you asking me if I'm okay with that?" I said, reaching for her hands. "I'm asking if you're sure. Because once we graduate, once we start making decisions about our future, the stakes get higher, the attention gets more intense. It becomes much harder to change your mind." I thought about everything we'd been through, the family drama, the public attention, the constant awareness that our relationship existed under a microscope. I thought about the alternative, a normal life with someone whose biggest complication was maybe having to deal with difficult in-laws or competing career ambitions. "Zara," I said, pulling her closer, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Whatever comes next, whatever pressure or attention or responsibility we have to deal with, I want to face it with you." She kissed me there among the grapevines, with the California sun warming our backs and her father's voice carrying across the vineyard as he negotiated some multi-million-dollar deal over the phone. It felt like a promise and a beginning all at once. When we got back to campus after that weekend, something had shifted between us. We both knew we were no longer just dating. We were building towards something permanent, something that would outlast college and survive whatever challenges our families and circumstances could throw at us. The future felt bright and uncertain and completely ours to create. But we had no idea that our biggest test was still coming, and that it would come from the direction we least expected. Graduation came and went in a blur of caps and gowns, proud family photos, and carefully orchestrated celebrations where both sets of parents maintained their best behavior. My parents had invited Zara to join our family dinner afterward, and while the conversations still had moments of stilted awkwardness, there was genuine effort being made on all sides. Nathan flew in for Zara's ceremony and charmed my parents with his down-to-earth demeanor and sincere interest in their work and lives. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like we'd successfully navigated the worst of our family complications. Zara and I had decided to stay in the Bay Area after graduation. She'd been accepted to a graduate program in computer science at Stanford, while I'd landed a position at a mid-sized consulting firm in San Francisco. We found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in the Mission District, still modest by Silicon Valley standards, but a significant upgrade from our college housing. Life felt like it was falling into place exactly as we'd hoped. The first sign that our careful equilibrium was about to be disrupted came 6 months after graduation, during what should have been a routine family dinner with my parents. They'd been making regular efforts to maintain our relationship, visiting us in the city once a month and always including Zara in their invitations. These dinners had become pleasant, if not exactly intimate. Polite conversations about work and current events, careful questions about our future plans, the slow work of rebuilding trust. But this particular evening felt different from the moment we walked into their house. Both my parents seemed nervous, exchanging glances when they thought we weren't looking, and my father kept checking his phone with unusual frequency. "Is everything okay?" I asked as we sat down to dinner. "You both seem distracted tonight." "Actually," my father said, setting down his fork with the deliberate precision that meant he'd rehearsed this moment, "there is something we wanted to discuss with you both." My stomach clenched. After everything we'd been through, I'd developed a Pavlovian response to my parents wanting to discuss anything important. "The pharmaceutical company where I work has been struggling for the past few years," he continued. "Competition from larger firms, changes in healthcare regulations, some poor investment decisions by upper management. They've been laying people off in waves, and I've been lucky to avoid the cuts so far, but—" He paused, and I could see him gathering courage for whatever he was about to say next. "But the writing is on the wall. My position is going to be eliminated within the next 6 months. At my age, in this industry, finding equivalent employment is going to be extremely difficult." The implications hit me immediately, but I waited for him to continue. "We're going to lose the house," my mother added quietly. "We've already refinanced twice trying to keep up with expenses. And without your father's salary, we won't be able to make the mortgage payments." "I'm sorry," I said, and I genuinely was. Despite everything that had happened between us, I didn't want to see my parents lose their home or struggle financially. "That's terrible. What can we do to help?" That's when the real purpose of this conversation became clear. "Well," my father said, his voice taking on that careful tone he used when he was about to ask for something significant, "we were hoping you might be able to put us in touch with some people. Through Zara's connections, I mean." Zara, who had been listening quietly up to this point, raised an eyebrow. "What kind of people?" "Nathan must know executives in the pharmaceutical industry," my mother said, leaning forward eagerly. "Or perhaps there are opportunities in his investment portfolio. Companies that might need someone with your father's experience." "We're not asking for charity," my father added quickly. "Just an introduction. Maybe a chance to get my resume in front of the right people. You know how these things work? Sometimes it's not what you know, but who you know." I felt that familiar, sinking feeling in my stomach as I realized what was happening. After more than a year of carefully rebuilt trust, after all their efforts to prove they'd changed, my parents were falling back into exactly the pattern that had caused our original rift. "So you want us to ask Nathan to help you find a job," I said slowly. "Not us," my mother corrected. "We want you to ask him, as a favor to family." Zara set down her water glass with deliberate care. "And what makes you think Nathan would be willing to do that favor?" "Well, you're dating his daughter," my father said, as if the answer was obvious. "Surely he'd want to help his future son-in-law's family." "Future daughter-in-law," I corrected automatically, though the larger issue was much more concerning than his casual heteronormativity. "Of course, sorry," he said with the dismissive wave of someone who considered the correction a minor detail. "The point is, you're part of his family now, or will be soon. Family helps family." There it was, the same entitled assumption that had characterized their attitude toward Zara from the beginning. They'd simply shifted from assuming she was a gold digger to assuming she was their golden ticket. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Zara said, her voice dangerously calm. "You spent months trying to break us up because you thought I was using Alexis for social connections. But now that you need social connections, you want us to ask my father to help you." "It's not the same thing at all," my mother protested. "We're family. We're not using anyone. We're just asking for help during a difficult time." "Are you?" Zara asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're expecting me to leverage my relationship with my father to solve your financial problems. How is that different from what you accused me of doing?" The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. My parents looked shocked that Zara was pushing back against their request, as if they'd expected her to immediately agree to help them. "I don't think you're understanding the gravity of our situation," my father said, his voice taking on an edge. "We're facing bankruptcy, potentially losing our home. This isn't about social climbing. This is about survival." "Dad," I interjected, "I think what Zara is trying to point out is—" "What I'm pointing out," Zara said firmly, "is that you've learned nothing from the past 2 years. You're still viewing our relationship primarily in terms of what it can do for you. You're still seeing me as a resource to be utilized, rather than a person to be respected. That's not fair, my mother said, her voice rising. We've welcomed you into our family, we've apologized for our mistakes, we've tried to make amends. Have you? Zara interrupted. Or have you been positioning yourselves for exactly this moment? Have you been nice to me because you genuinely changed your minds about who I am? Or because you realized I might be useful to you someday? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and the silence that followed was damning. I could see my parents struggling to find an answer that didn't sound as mercenary as their actual motivations clearly were. I think we should go, I said quietly, standing up from the table. We need to process this conversation. Alexis, wait, my father said urgently. You're overreacting. We're just asking for help from family during a crisis. That's what families do. Is it? I asked. Because when I was in crisis at 19, when I needed my family's support and understanding, where was this attitude then? When I was practically homeless and working multiple jobs to put myself through school, did you offer help? Or did you wait for me to come crawling back so you could say, I told you so? That was different, my mother said weakly. How was it different? Because I was the one in need instead of you? We left without another word, driving home in tense silence while I tried to process the crushing disappointment of realizing that my parents hadn't really changed at all. They'd just gotten better at hiding their true motivations until they needed something. I'm sorry, I told Zara as we sat in our living room later that evening. I'm sorry you had to sit through that, and I'm sorry they put you in that position. You don't have to apologize for them, she said, curling up beside me on the couch. But I need you to know that this is exactly what I was afraid of when I told you who my father was. This is why I kept it secret for so long. What do you mean? I mean that for the rest of our lives, every interaction with your family is going to be filtered through their awareness of my father's wealth and influence. Every favor they ask, every crisis they face, every celebration they want to enhance, they're going to see dollar signs instead of seeing us. The terrible thing was, I couldn't argue with her assessment, because even as I sat there feeling angry and disappointed in my parents, part of me was already wondering if maybe we should consider helping them. If maybe this could be a way to finally put all the family drama behind us. And if I was thinking that way despite everything we'd been through, how could I expect my parents to see it any differently? The phone started ringing before we'd even finished our conversation. My parents, calling to apologize, to explain, to ask if we'd reconsider. But we didn't answer. For the first time since we'd reconciled, I wasn't sure we ever would. The campaign began the next morning with a text from my mother that arrived before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Sweetheart, I think we got off on the wrong foot last night. Can we try again? Your father has been up all night worried about how he came across. It was followed an hour later by a longer message from my father. Alexis, I realize our request may have seemed presumptuous. We're just scared and don't know where else to turn. We would never want to put you or Zara in an uncomfortable position. Perhaps we could discuss some alternatives? But the real escalation came when they began mobilizing the extended family network they'd used so effectively during my college years. Derek called first, his voice carefully neutral as he asked if I'd heard about Uncle Richard's job situation and whether there might be anything we could do to help. We? I repeated. Since when is this a collective family responsibility? Come on, Alexis, the guy's facing bankruptcy. I know you and Zara have connections that could make a real difference here. Wouldn't you want the family to help you if the situation were reversed? The family didn't help me when the situation was reversed, I reminded him. When I was kicked out at 19, where was all this concern for family solidarity? That gave him pause, but only briefly. That was different. You were a teenager making emotional decisions. This is about helping people who raised you when they're facing a genuine crisis. The calls continued throughout the week. My Aunt Caroline wanted to know if I had given any more thought to my parents' situation. My grandmother called to share her concerns about family members who forget where they came from. Even some of my parents' friends reached out, people who'd gotten my number from God knows where, to tell me how worried they were about my parents and how much they'd appreciate any help I could provide. The pressure was relentless and increasingly desperate. By Friday, my mother was leaving voicemails that bordered on manipulation. "I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this. We're not asking you to give us money. We're just asking you to make a phone call. Is your pride really more important than your family's welfare?" The breakthrough moment came when Zara arrived home from her evening classes to find me sitting on our couch, staring at my phone with 17 missed calls from various family members. "They're not going to stop," I said without looking up. "They're going to keep escalating until I either give in or cut them off completely." She sat down beside me, taking in my exhausted expression. "What do you want to do?" "I want to help them," I admitted. "Not because I think they deserve it, but because I love them, despite everything they've put us through. I want to make one phone call to Nathan and solve their problems so we can all move on with our lives." But I know that if I do that, it won't solve anything. It'll just prove to them that emotional manipulation works, that if they apply enough pressure, I'll eventually use your family connections to bail them out. And the next time they face a crisis, or want something they can't get on their own, they'll go right back to this playbook. Zara was quiet for a long moment, considering. "There is a third option," she said finally. "What's that?" "We could give them exactly what they're asking for, but on our terms. Make them face the reality of what they're actually requesting." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm texting my father. I'm going to ask him if he'd be willing to meet with your father about potential job opportunities." I stared at her. "Are you serious?" "Completely. But here's the catch. Nathan's going to handle this meeting exactly the way he handles all his business meetings. Professional, direct, and brutally honest. Your father's going to get a real interview with one of the most successful businessmen in the country, and Nathan's going to evaluate him based on merit, not family connections. And if my dad doesn't measure up, then he'll get feedback about why he didn't measure up, and he'll have to live with the fact that the opportunity he begged for was the opportunity that exposed his limitations." Nathan's response came back within an hour. "I'd be happy to meet with Richard. I have 30 minutes available Monday morning at 9 a.m. He should come prepared with his resume, 3 professional references, and a clear explanation of what value he would bring to any organization that hired him. I'll evaluate him the same way I evaluate every candidate who comes through my office." When I called my parents to relay this information, the reaction was immediate euphoria followed by rapid backpedaling as the reality of the situation sank in. "Monday morning?" my mother repeated. "That's only 3 days away. Does Nathan understand your father's situation? This isn't really a job interview. It's more of a family favor." "It's exactly a job interview," I corrected. "Nathan runs a venture capital firm, not a charity. If he's going to recommend Dad for anything, he needs to believe Dad can actually do the work." "But surely he'll take into account that Richard is your father," she pressed. "Family relationships matter in business." "Actually, they don't. Not to Nathan. He's successful because he makes decisions based on merit, not personal connections. Dad wanted an introduction to someone with influence. This is what that looks like." The weekend that followed was chaos. My father spent hours updating his resume and researching Nathan's companies, clearly realizing for the first time that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation where his connection to me would smooth over any professional shortcomings. My mother called repeatedly with questions about what Nathan would want to hear, what kind of impression my father should make, whether there were any topics he should avoid. "Should he mention that you're dating Zara?" she asked during one particularly frantic call. "Would that help establish a connection?" "Mom, if Dad tries to leverage his daughter's romantic relationship during a professional meeting with Nathan Blackstone, he'll be out of that office in about 30 seconds. Nathan respects competence and preparation. Everything else is irrelevant to him." Monday morning arrived with my phone buzzing constantly, as my parents provided real-time updates on my father's preparation, leaving early to avoid traffic, stopping at Starbucks for coffee to calm his nerves, arriving at Nathan's office building, and being overwhelmed by the security and luxury. The meeting itself lasted exactly 30 minutes, as promised. When it was over, my father called immediately, his voice strained and shaken. "Alexis, I need to talk to you. Can you and Zara come over tonight? There are some things I need to say." "How did it go with Nathan?" "Just, please come over, both of you." That evening, we found my parents sitting at their kitchen table, looking like they'd aged years in a single day. My father's interview clothes were rumpled, and he had the shell-shocked expression of someone who'd just had his limitations laid bare by an expert. "Nathan offered me a job," he said without preamble. "That's wonderful," I started to say, but he held up a hand to stop me. He offered me a job as a junior analyst at one of his portfolio companies. Entry level. 40% less than what I was making at the pharmaceutical company. He was very clear that it was based on my potential to learn, not my current qualifications, and that I'd be competing with recent college graduates for advancement opportunities. The room was silent as the implications sank in. He also gave me some feedback about my interview performance, my father continued, his voice flat. He said I spent too much time talking about what I'd done in the past and not enough time demonstrating what I could contribute going forward. He said I seemed to expect consideration based on personal connections rather than professional merit. He said if I was serious about changing careers at my age, I needed to start thinking like someone who had something to prove, not someone who was owed something. My mother's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "How dare he speak to you that way? After everything we've been through, after you're practically family?" "He was right," my father interrupted, looking directly at me. "Everything he said was right. I walked into that office expecting special treatment because of who you're dating. I thought being your father would matter more than being qualified. And when he treated me like any other job candidate, I realized how entitled and presumptuous I've been about all of this." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "The worst part is, I saw myself clearly for the first time in years. I saw what you and Zara have been dealing with from us. The constant expectation that your relationship should benefit us somehow, that Zara's family connections should be available for our use. I've been thinking about you as my daughter who's dating someone useful, instead of thinking about you as a person who deserves to be loved for who you are." It was the most honest self-assessment I'd ever heard from my father, and it left me speechless. "I took the job," he said quietly, "starting next month. It's going to be humbling, working with people half my age, for a fraction of what I used to make. But Nathan was right about one thing. If I'm going to change my life at this point, I need to start proving my worth instead of expecting it to be recognized automatically." The conversation that followed was the most genuine one we'd had as a family in years. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, no carefully calculated positions designed to get a specific outcome. Just honest acknowledgement of how badly we'd all handled things and tentative steps towards something better. By the time Zara and I left that night, something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. It wasn't fixed. Years of dysfunction don't disappear overnight, but it was real in a way it hadn't been before. "Your father really is brilliant," Zara said as we drove home. "He managed to give your dad exactly what he asked for while forcing him to confront exactly what he was asking for. Think it'll stick? This new self-awareness? I think your father scared himself today. Sometimes that's what it takes." For the first time in months, I felt genuinely hopeful about the possibility of having a healthy relationship with my parents. Not the relationship we'd had before, but something better. Something built on mutual respect, instead of expectation and manipulation. It had taken a crisis to get us here, but we'd finally found our way to solid ground. 2 years later, I stood in the bridal suite of the Meridian Grand Hotel, the same venue where Zara and I had made our public debut at her father's gala, adjusting the train of my wedding dress and marveling at how dramatically everything had changed since that night when I'd first walked through these doors. The woman staring back at me from the ornate mirror looked confident and radiant in a way that 19-year-old Alexis could never have imagined. The dress was custom designed by one of Nathan's favorite designers, a flowing creation of silk and delicate beadwork that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. But what struck me most wasn't how I looked, it was how I felt, completely unshakably certain that I was exactly where I belonged. "You ready for this?" Derek asked, appearing in the doorway in his groomsman's tuxedo. My cousin had evolved into one of my closest friends over the past few years, and his presence in my wedding party felt like a symbol of how much our family had grown and changed. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," I replied, meaning every word. The past 2 years had been a masterclass in what healthy family relationships could look like when built on genuine respect rather than manipulation and expectation. My father had thrived in his new position, earning 2 promotions and developing a reputation as one of the most dedicated analysts in the company. The humility forced on him by starting over at 50 had transformed him into someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, curious, hardworking, and grateful for opportunities rather than entitled to them. My mother had undergone her own transformation, returning to school to get her master's degree in education and eventually landing a position as a curriculum coordinator for the school district. Watching her rebuild her confidence and find her own professional identity outside of her role as my father's wife had been inspiring and beautiful. But the most significant change had been in how they treated Zara and our relationship. Gone were the awkward attempts to impress or curry favor. Instead, they developed genuine affection for her based on who she was as a person, her dry sense of humor, her fierce intelligence, her unwavering loyalty to the people she loved. They'd learned to see her as their daughter-in-law-to-be rather than as a conduit to social and financial opportunities. The wedding planning process had been its own kind of revelation. Nathan had offered to pay for everything, naturally, but Zara and I had insisted on covering the costs ourselves, not out of pride or stubbornness, but because we wanted this celebration to reflect our values and choices, rather than what money could buy. We'd chosen the Meridian Grand not because it was expensive, but because it held special meaning for our story. 5 minutes, my mother announced, bustling into the suite with the efficient energy she'd developed in her new career. She looked stunning in her mother-of-the-bride dress, and more importantly, she looked genuinely happy. "Your father's down there trying not to cry, which is absolutely hopeless because he's been tearing up since breakfast." The past few months had shown me a side of my parents I'd never seen before, their capacity for genuine joy in my happiness without needing it to reflect well on them or benefit them in some way. My father had walked me through the planning process with the same careful attention he now brought to his work projects, asking thoughtful questions about our vision and offering support without trying to control outcomes. My mother had thrown herself into wedding coordination with the organizational skills that made her so effective in her professional life, handling logistics while respecting our decisions about style and substance. "How's Zara doing?" I asked. "Gorgeous, calm, and making jokes about how this is the one event her father can't solve with a business meeting," my mother replied with a laugh. "I think she's more relaxed than any of the rest of us." That sounded exactly like Zara, who had approached our wedding with the same practical confidence she brought to everything else. She'd been more interested in the marriage than the wedding, more focused on the life we were building together than the party celebrating it. The music began, and suddenly it was time. My father appeared at my side, looking distinguished in his tuxedo and radiating the kind of quiet pride that came from genuine accomplishment rather than reflected glory. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked, offering his arm. "So ready," I replied. Walking down the aisle of the Meridian Grand's ballroom, I was struck by how perfectly the guest list represented the life Zara and I had built together. Nathan sat in the front row next to my parents, the unlikely friendship they'd developed over monthly family dinners evident in their easy conversation. Derek and his girlfriend were there, along with college friends, coworkers, and the extended family members who had learned to genuinely celebrate our relationship rather than calculate what it might do for them. But my eyes were locked on Zara, waiting for me at the altar in a midnight blue suit that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. She looked like herself, confident, beautiful, and completely uninterested in anyone's opinion except mine. When our eyes met, she smiled that private smile that had been mine alone since our coffee shop days, and I felt my heart do the same flip it had done the first time she'd really looked at me. The ceremony itself was a blur of vows we'd written ourselves, rings that had belonged to Nathan's grandmother, and the overwhelming sensation of everything in my life clicking into perfect alignment. When the officiant pronounced us married and Zara kissed me for the first time as my wife, the ballroom erupted in applause from people who were genuinely celebrating our happiness rather than what our union might mean for them. During the reception, as I watched my father-in-law dance with my mother while my own father chatted animatedly with some of Nathan's business partners about renewable energy initiatives, I marveled at how we'd all learned to be authentic with each other. No one was performing or positioning or calculating advantage. They were just being themselves and enjoying each other's company. "No regrets?" Zara asked, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne as the band played something slow and romantic. "About what?" "About choosing the girl with the purple hair and the attitude problem over family approval. About all the drama and complications that came with dating me." I looked around the ballroom at my parents laughing with Nathan, at Derek giving an embarrassingly heartfelt best man speech, at all the people who'd learned to love us for who we really were rather than what we represented. "Are you kidding?" I said, pulling her onto the dance floor. "Choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made. Everything else, the growth, the honesty, the real relationships we have now, that was just the bonus that came with being brave enough to follow my heart." As we swayed together in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by family and friends who'd learned to see past their own assumptions and prejudices, I thought about that scared 19-year-old who'd stood up at Easter dinner and defended her girlfriend against people who judged her based on appearances. She'd had no idea that her rebellion would ultimately lead not just to love, but to the kind of authentic family relationships she'd always wanted but never known were possible. "So," Zara murmured against my ear as the song ended, "what's next for us, Mrs. Blackstone Thornfield?" "Everything," I replied without hesitation. "Absolutely everything." And for the first time in my life, I knew that whatever challenges came next, we'd face them together. Not just as 2 people in love, but as part of a family that had learned to value character over appearances, authenticity over convenience, and love over everything else. The scared, angry girl who'd been kicked out for her choices had become a confident woman surrounded by people who celebrated those same choices. And the girlfriend they'd tried to chase away had become the wife who'd taught us all what unconditional love actually looked like. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it teaches everyone involved how to love better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.